And here we go. We have liftoff.
Propulsion continues to be nominal.
R68 chamber pressure looks good.
Following up. Roger, roll, Atlantis.
Water towers, fly! Yes!
Payload down to nominal.
Flight downside FD off. Bring in FD off. Off. It's orange!
145. Oh my god! Oh my god!
Decollage.
What is it?
Put that in the big bag, Eagle.
343 unfolds to go.
Indeed.
We rise together, back to the moon and beyond.
The methane will be igniting in the flare, correct?
Yikes. You good? Sure. We don't need any more of these.
Good evening and good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. This is Lon Seidman with NSF, and we are back once again with Countdown to Launch. We are very closely watching all of the events leading up to the third flight test of Starship, and I know a lot of you are interested in that. Also interested in that are my co-hosts today, starting with Trevor Sesnick. How you doing, Trevor?
Yeah, certainly can't complain. We've had a lot of exciting things happen this last week where it felt like launch went from many weeks off to all of the sudden Thursday. So what a time to be paying attention to Starship.
You gotta watch it because, right, things can happen real quick, right? We even thought, hey, we got a couple more weeks here, and suddenly it's Thursday all of a sudden. So we are geared up and ready to go. And also joining us is a new face here at NSF, Ryan Weber. How you doing, Ryan?
Doing great, Lon. Yeah, it's really it kind of came up on us a little bit quick because when they rolled back after that wet dress, the aborted wet dress, we thought they might take a little bit of a while, but looks like they figured everything out and they're ready to go. So
they're ready, as far as we can see, they're ready to go, and we're going to see how ready they are as we work our way through the topic today. Trevor, I wanted to start with you because the last time I was on this show, we had everything destacked. Now we are stacked. Do you think this is the last stack for this stack of rocket?
Yeah, it certainly seems like it. Right, the vehicle was restacked over the weekend, and also over the weekend before the vehicle was restacked, we saw SpaceX working on the flight termination system on both vehicles. And that system seems to be closed out on both ship and booster. And ever since that work was done, there has been very little work going on around the vehicle. So that makes me think that they're probably just in a point of waiting for regulatory approval. Once regulatory approval comes out, I think just SpaceX is going to go boom right into a launch countdown. So hopefully, let's cross our fingers, this is the last stack of Starship until it gets destacked during the hot stage maneuver.
And, you know, one of the things that we were talking about in the back channel ahead of time here was just, it's not quite routine there yet at Starbase, but it feels a lot different than the last go around where there was a lot of open-ended questions, what's going to work, what's not going to work. Ryan, how do you think this launch cadence is different than the last one, at least insofar as what you've been observing?
well, it's definitely a little bit shorter of a launch test campaign. They're learning a lot more. Like, they never did a spin prime with Booster 10. They just went straight for a static fire. It was kind of odd that they went and did another spin prime for Ship 28, but it looks like that was just their quick verification of when they took engines off to... It looks like they did something on the aft dome. Probably could be related to the mitigations or not. We don't really know why they did that, but that's probably why they just went ahead with the spin prime, because they're confident enough in that.
And what is a spin prime?
Basically, spin prime is when they'll load both methane and liquid oxygen on board the vehicle, but all they really do is they just kind of spin up the LOX turbopump. So what they'll do is they'll use their helium, just spin up the LOX turbopump, basically pushing a bunch of liquid oxygen through, as we saw earlier with Ship 29, and it just kind of tests all the connections, make sure it like leak checks everything, just an operational check of most of the engine, and usually it's good enough. I guess at least it's good enough for them. So,
least to make sure your plumbing is working. That's one of the things when you start really diving into the details of rocketry. There's a lot of plumbing involved with this, more than you'd think, because it is very high-speed plumbing, very high-performance plumbing, and certainly when you have that many engines, it creates a lot of complexities and a lot of failure points, which we have seen as they've been testing out this system over the last couple of years. Now, Trevor, what's next? So we've got the rocket stacked. We've done some spin testing here. What are we expecting next to happen if we are looking at a launch on Thursday, besides the regulatory side, which we'll get to in a minute?
Yeah, so first of all, we've started seeing signs just now that it looks like Ship 29 is going to be sent back to the production site as we've been speculating. We're not sure exactly when that's going to happen, but it looks like SpaceX will not be conducting a static fire of Ship 29 ahead of Flight 3. They'll leave that testing until afterward. But what's left on the stack is quite little. They've already removed the work platform and temporary attachments on the ship quick disconnect. I believe there's still a little bit of scaffolding at the base of the vehicle on the OLM, which will need to be removed. But aside from that, not a whole lot is left. So it really just is that big regulatory item that they are waiting on at this point, which I'm sure we'll spend most of the show talking about.
And Ryan, we were looking at Ship 29 and the crane coming over. They've been doing a lot of work almost simultaneously here as they're getting Flight 3 ready. That other Starship is already going through a lot of the checks and tests that they do ahead of a launch. So do you think this is going to mean that there'll be a very short wait between 3 and 4?
There could be a shorter wait. I think a lot of it, there's a lot that depends on it. I mean, one is how successful this flight is, like what the kind of mishap is. Because if they have any kind of anomaly or whatever, they still have to perform a mishap investigation. That's still required. Now, like how the pad is refurbished, I don't really know because they did a lot of upgrades in the last couple of months. I don't know if a lot of it was upgrades or pad refurbishments. We don't really have we only have a kind of two data points really, and one was a destroyed pad. The other one was
right.
Well, the water deluge they just had. So
right.
We'll have to see how quickly they can turn it around. But in terms of vehicles, like Booster 11 and Ship 29 I think they're around like a month ahead of the timeline compared to where 28 and 10 were when Flight 2 launched. So it could be quicker, which would be nice to see.
And I would imagine SpaceX wants to get these rockets off out of the warehouse because they keep cranking them out, and the only way to get rid of them is to launch them at this point. So yeah. I'm sure they're going to want to move that quickly. And on the regulatory side, so SpaceX can't launch this rocket until the FAA gives them the clearance to do so. They're working towards a Thursday launch potentially, which is why we have our no earlier than clock running here, the net, which is looking like 62 hours from now. But Trevor, there's a lot that could happen here. What does the FAA have to do, and what can SpaceX do up until the FAA gives them clearance?
Yeah, that's a great question and something that's important to talk about. So SpaceX announced that launch is no earlier than Thursday, pending regulatory approval. So that's the big watch item, is this pending regulatory approval. So then the question is, what does the FAA need to do? So following Flight 2, since those vehicles both ended in rapid unscheduled disassemblies, the FAA and SpaceX had to undergo a mishap investigation in which they looked at all of the data that they collected and performed tests to figure out what exactly happened on both of these vehicles. And a few weeks ago at this point, the FAA issued a statement that they had signed off on SpaceX's findings. So SpaceX leads the investigation, and the FAA is alongside them. And then at the end, the FAA says, "Yep, you guys are all good. We're happy with the fixes that you guys are going to make." So SpaceX and the FAA came to the conclusion that they need to make 17 corrective actions ahead of this flight. Unfortunately, unlike on the last flight, we don't know what the list is at all. The FAA is not allowed to release this information because it's considered proprietary to the company. So between flights 1 and 2, SpaceX's CEO Elon Musk, he posted those corrective actions on Twitter, and unfortunately he is not between flights 2 and 3. So then that gets into the question of what is SpaceX able to do while they're waiting for launch approval? And the main thing is SpaceX is able to complete all testing up to but not including ignition of the engines. So if SpaceX wanted to, they could perform another wet dress rehearsal, or let's say on Thursday, if they thought the launch license was really close, they could start fueling the vehicle early in the morning, prepare for a launch, and go all the way up until like T minus a minute or something like that. And then once they reach that point, then they could decide to hold there for as long as they can, which on Flight 2 is 15 minutes. I suspect it's a little bit longer now since they have changes to the GSE. But once they reach that point, they could then decide to scrub if they don't have regulatory approval. So they're able to do a lot, but not launch until they get that launch license from the FAA.
And when do we think that's coming, Ryan? Because it's now essentially the end of Monday. It's 4 p.m. Eastern time. It's certainly a little bit earlier at Starbase, but not much. It's not likely we'll see a license today. If we get one while we're talking here, we'll of course share that with you. When do you think, Ryan, they would need to have that license to be ready to go for Thursday?
So in theory, well, usually the last two times they've basically put the license out like 5 p.m. Central, or like it's like sometimes 4 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Eastern sometimes, or closer to when some of the offices close for the FAA is usually what they've done the last two flights. Now, it could come out today still, it could come out tomorrow, it could come out Thursday. I don't think it would come out, Wednesday. I don't think it would come out Thursday morning, because that'd be pretty early in the morning for them. But you never know. Honestly, you never know when it could come out. It's ready when it's ready, and right now it isn't ready yet. So.
Right, and they have to meet all these requirements. We don't know what they are this time. I would say, though, the fact that Elon is not tweeting with frustration over the FAA process here leads me to think that they're pretty close to a resolution to whatever they're having to wrap up here. And what's been interesting, too, is we've been looking at this launch cadence here with this third flight test, is how much less there is for us to talk about versus the prior ones, right? There was so much to talk about as we were leading up to Flight 1, obviously. Flight 2 had a bunch of things that happened in Flight 1 that had to be corrected, and they were all visible as we were just talking about. This one feels certainly no less interesting, but there's just less to really talk about, which gives me the idea that we might see a more successful launch here. But one thing that did happen on Flight 2, even though a lot of it went well, was that these tiles were popping off. Kind of, this is our notes here, they were raining tiles down. Trevor, what have they been doing to try to get those tiles to stay on, which, as many of you recall, our beloved space shuttle had a lot of issues with tiles staying on during liftoff with all the forces that they experienced there. What do you think is going to happen on the tile front?
Yeah, so I think it's worth mentioning a few things. So ahead of this launch, we've seen SpaceX performing a lot of work on the heat shield. They were, for several days straight, when Ship 28 was destacked, they were going and checking each tile, replacing them, reseating some of them, and so on. And that's work that we never saw happen to Ship 25. So to me, that means that SpaceX has, it signifies to me that SpaceX probably thinks the ship is going to make its re-entry this time when they didn't have as much confidence on the previous two times. So with that all said, I think it's easy to look at Flight 2 and say, well, they had a ton of tiles fall off. That's not exactly a good sign. And I wouldn't disagree with you, but they didn't care about making sure the heat shield was good. So I think if on this flight we see heat shield tiles falling off, that'll be a little bit worse of a sign compared to Flight 1.
And that, right.
That said...
Go ahead, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, too, that where they want to send Starship this time to make its re-entry is very different. We have a question here from the chat. And by the way, you can ping us at NASASpaceflight, and we'll do our best to get as many questions in as we can during this stream today. 1979 Canaveral wants to know, I can have either one of you answer this one. Why are they opting to essentially land or splash down in the Indian Ocean versus off the coast of Hawaii like they were planning to before? So before there was a much longer orbit here where they would kind of go past the Indian Ocean and end up over by Hawaii. Now they're just going to get it up there and bring it back down. Why is that? And maybe we'll start with Brian on that one. Oh, sorry, whoever wants to take it. Sorry.
You can go, Trevor, if you want.
Okay. So one of the new test objectives on this mission that SpaceX wants to test is relighting a Raptor engine in space. So what SpaceX wants to do is they still want to go into a suborbital technically trajectory so that if there's a failure in the deorbit burn, they just re-enter in a perfectly safe area. And that's what we saw on Flight 1 and 2, and a similar thing that we're seeing on Flight 3. But SpaceX still wants to be able to test this deorbit burn. So what they're doing is just launching into a slightly different trajectory so that if the failure burn works, they're splashed down into a fairly similar area as if it fails. So you'll see the closure in the Indian Ocean is just quite large to accommodate both the deorbit burn fully working and the deorbit burn not working at all. When with Hawaii, they had no plans to do this extra burn, so they just needed like the one reentry corridor that made sense to be over Hawaii for ground tracking reasons.
And Ryan, what are we going to see here insofar as what comes back down? Because both the booster and Starship will be returning to Earth and basically ditching themselves in the ocean. What do you hope or expect to see, both from the booster and Starship, as this test is being conducted, and hopefully done successfully so we don't see them explode in the air, but rather destroy themselves in the ocean?
Well, the hope is that the booster survives the boost back burn, makes it down, and they actually do perform a landing burn, and it soft splashes down in the ocean in a single piece. And then the hope is that maybe the heat shield actually works on 28. Maybe they get lucky. Maybe, but I mean, it's still brand new, so who knows if it will work. I hope it does. It'd be cool to see Ship 28 fully re-enter, no flap issues, no heat shield issues, and it comes down, splashes down. They're not going to do a flip and burn like they had during the suborbital flights. They're just going to slam into the ocean at terminal velocity and make sure the vehicle destroys itself so they don't have to go out and sink it. So,
yeah, it gets expensive when you've got to sink your rocket after it successfully splashes down. And I would imagine, Trevor, they're going to have some way to observe those tiles on the way back down. I'm guessing SpaceX will have part of their fleet out there, or some camera with a decent lens to at least look at what's going on, or do they have other means of measuring the success or the health, if you will, of the heat shield, which is not just a shield, but a shield of tiles?
Right. Yeah, so they have some means, depending on if they work or not. So Ship 28 has several Starlink antennas, and SpaceX is hoping that they'll be able to maintain connection through all of reentry, through the clever place where they're putting the Starlink antennas on Starship. And this would be kind of unprecedented because in history, right, there's always been the roughly 5-minute long blackout phase. Shuttle had it, Dragon has it, Starliner will have it, where the plasma is surrounding the vehicle, so they're unable to communicate with the ground. And it's always a little bit scary of a time. I remember my heart was certainly racing during DM2 reentry when SpaceX was doing it for the first time. So they're hoping to maintain connection through reentry, and if they're able to, then they'll have all sorts of data collectors that will allow them to get an idea of where the heat shield is failing, where there may need to be more reinforcement, and what exactly happened. But aside from that, like you were saying, SpaceX is planning on having, I'm sure NASA's having some support to observe the that section of flight, and then I'm sure they also have a bunch of ground assets that will be pointed up to track it. So we don't have any like official details on how that will happen, but SpaceX definitely wants to collect that data on this flight.
I would imagine they have to. I mean, it's too valuable to not have some means of collection there. And let me ask you this question of Brian here. One of the milestones of the mission here, I'm going to pull up a question from Framrick here. Is this transfer of cryogenic propellant in flight. And this is something obviously not very visible, but very important for NASA and all of the Artemis missions to come. Can you talk a little bit about that and what we should expect to see there?
Yeah, so what they plan on doing is they're going to transfer, it's going to be from the header tank to the main tank. They're basically going to transfer like 10 tons or so of liquid oxygen while they're in coast phase. Um, so they can demonstrate to NASA, it's called the tipping point contract. So they can demonstrate to NASA that they can do relatively large scale cryogenic propellant, because before this, most of the time, the only kind of propellant transfer was like basically progress to the ISS, like hypergolics. Never been like full on cryogenic. So this will be a first, especially for this amount. And then, because later down the line, they're going to have to learn how to transfer what? Uh, Maybe all at once through from a depot to a crewed ship, like almost 1,000 metric tons of cryogenic propellant or something along those lines. It's going to be a lot down the line, so they're going to have to learn. So they got to learn how to do it. So
Yeah, I was looking at some graphics from earlier in the Artemis program planning, and it looks pretty extensive that they've got to get multiple Starship flights up there, multiple dockings or berthings or whatever they want to call it, and a lot of transfer of fuel in orbit. So this will certainly demonstrate that some of this is going to work, and it shows you just how much farther we have to go and why there's so much pressure on SpaceX to get this right, for sure. Hey, before we go too much further, I want to thank some folks here in the channel who've been helping keeping the lights on around here. First of all, I want to thank Stefan for becoming a Pad Rat member. Also want to thank General John Kobe, who made a super chat there. Thank you very much for that. We also, and we're going to talk about the store in a little bit, but we had somebody pick up something on the store at shop.nasaspaceflight.com. And when you shop there, you can actually leave a message that pops into our control panel here so we can acknowledge you there. We also have Texas Roast, who's a new Pad Rat member. And then what happens here in the NSF community is that the longer you sit in the chat, the more likely it is somebody may gift you a membership. So Westy the Third gifted a Red Team membership, along with Blushy Boy, and then Kakushi Goto became a new Pad Rat member as well. So thank you everybody for your contributions to the channel. And we've got a lot of things that happen around here. There's a lot of infrastructure to support the coverage that we have with SpaceX, but also with NASA and all the other things happening in spaceflight. It's actually been very busy around here, Trevor, hasn't it been? Trying to keep track of it all. We almost need like a shift of anchors that can just follow all of this and keep everybody up to date on a 24/7 basis. I think that's where we may end up at some point. There's a lot happening, isn't there? Not just at Starbase.
Yeah. I mean, there's already been, I think 24 Falcon launches this year. Yeah, 24 Falcon 9 missions this year, which we've covered. My guess is like 20 of them, maybe around there. That's a lot to cover than everything happening at Starbase. It's been quite the busy year, and we're only in March.
Yeah, we're barely into March, and this is how busy it's been. And, Ryan, one of the things I was thinking about the other night was that SpaceX, of course, launched 3 missions pretty much in the same evening. They had a flight to the space station, the rideshare, and the Starlink, basically using all of their pads all at once. Is this part of their overall strategy to get their teams ready for this level of cadence? Because eventually they want Starship to fly like a airliner, right? Just constantly in motion. Do you think that's what they're doing here with this very aggressive uptick in Falcon launches?
Yeah, it's definitely to help prepare teams for that eventuality. And to add to that, during all that, they also performed a wet dress rehearsal on Starship. So, they were basically fueling 4 full rockets within 24 hours, which is kind of ridiculous. Launched 3 of them. So, but yeah, they're going to have to learn how to quickly turn things around, quickly inspect things, do prop loading, and have good, solid communication and be safe doing it in order to do airline-like operations. Because I can tell you, it can get pretty quick when you're trying to turn a plane around in an hour, and something goes wrong, then you have to try to fix it. And yeah, it can get fun.
It sure can, and this is spaceflight where you've got a lot of other things that happen, and unlike an airplane, you really need to do a significant amount of refurbishment to your rocket to get it ready to fly again too. So it's not only just the launch component, but getting them back as well. And Trevor, one of the big things that Starship brings to the mix here is that right now with Falcon, when you launch Falcon, you get the first stage back, but the second stage just can't get back. It's just not feasible given the fuel restraints and all the other factors that come into play. Starship is going to be more than just for Artemis, right? What else do you think they're going to be doing with Starship in the near future? Because there's one demonstration on this flight that we haven't talked about, which is the cargo bay, or at least the door for it.
This just definitely highlights the just ridiculous scale of this vehicle. Right, I think Starship holds on the order of 10 times more propellant than Falcon 9. So it's just enormous. And I've never been down to Boca, so I don't even properly appreciate the scale. I really need to get down. But yeah, you're right that, long-term Falcon 9 is not going to be SpaceX's main vehicle. They'll be transitioning everything over to Starship. And one of the big things that SpaceX has been wanting to do is start deploying Starlink satellites from Starship. Right? Keep in mind that Starship is going to launch the full-size V2 satellites. So Falcon 9 is launching the V2 mini satellites, which are on the order of 730 kilograms. And full-size Starlink V2 is going to be on the order of 1,200 kilograms. So you're, a significant increase in mass and size on these satellites that's going to allow for even more bandwidth in the Starlink constellation. So as part of that, a lot of recent Starships have had these payload bay doors. 24 had it and 25 had it, but they were welded shut. SpaceX must not have liked the design, or there were structural issues or something, so they just welded them shut. But for the first time, 28 does not have its payload bay door welded shut. So one of the demonstrations that SpaceX is hoping to do on this mission is right after they're in that suborbital almost orbit, they will open the payload bay door, and then they'll let this ship coast for on the order of 15 minutes, if I remember correctly. And in that time, they'll do the propellant transfer demo, and then they're going to close the payload bay door. So there won't be any Starlink satellites on board or mock deployed or anything like that, but it'll still give them good data for when they start launching Starlinks on, hopefully the coming flights of Starship.
And Martin Keating's here in the chat asks, Ryan, when do you think Starship will take another Tesla into orbit? Because that was quite a demonstration on the first Falcon Heavy. Do you think maybe there will be some kind of demo in the cargo bay that they maybe not a Tesla, but maybe something to simulate the weight of a Starlink mission?
I don't know about this one. There's not a payload on this one as far as we know. I never really saw them load anything into it. But when they do make their actual payload door, whether that's the chopper type or the shuttle doors, maybe they put a Cybertruck in there. I don't know. That'd be kind of funny.
It would make sense. I mean, that's the currently heavily marketed vehicle, right? So we'll have to see what they put together. But Trevor, typically, when a test launch is made, they usually have some kind of weight in there to simulate what the cargo might be. We haven't seen that with Starship at all, have we? That we know of.
Yeah, not really. Right, normally that weight's just a big piece of concrete or something like that that's cheap for if the vehicle explodes, but very much not on this flight. But SpaceX is doing a little bit different of a way of simulating that. So instead of having a big block of concrete or a big payload on board, what they're doing is they're just dumping the liquid oxygen. And I assume they also dump some methane over. I wonder how they deal with methane. Because we haven't heard of any methane dumps, but I would be shocked if it didn't happen. So what that allows them to do is once the Starship gets to orbit, it will have identical fuel characteristics as if it had some big payload on board. So what that allows SpaceX to do then is simulate reentry fully correctly, because you don't want a lot of the extra fuel in your tanks, since that will affect where your center of gravity is, which you don't want your center of gravity to be off when you're going through reentry. So they're simulating a payload in a little bit different of a way that's not quite as exciting as a Tesla Roadster, but gets the job done.
Not as fun, but it does get the job done. Hey, let me toss this technical question out here. This comes from Chris, and I'll start off with Ryan here, and hopefully you'll give us some explanation of what this acronym means. Do you think there should be some shielding over the SQD to protect it from the launch blast to prevent a repeat of what happened with Flight 2? So first of all, tell us what the SQD is, if you know what it is, and what he's talking about here.
So it's probably talking about the ship QD arm. SpaceX has had to modify the location of the ship QD twice. So originally, the QD was flat, that really right parallel with the arm itself, back with Booster 4 and Ship 20, way back in the old days there. But when it came to Ship 24, they moved the ship QD up a little bit on the ship itself. So they had to move the ship QD up a little bit. And then, well, now they had to put it on a stilt. So then it had to extend and go up. Then they added a hot stage ring. So they added basically another 1.82 meters to the stack. So then they had to extend it again. Unfortunately, last time it looks like they didn't make it robust enough, the extension or and whatnot. So one of the arms broke a little bit. That's why it was a little tilted off to the side. They did fix it, and it's a little bit more robust now. But I think they need to find a way to swing the arm out a little bit faster, because the exhaust then it kind of gets nicked by the exhaust when since it doesn't swing out fast enough. But it's possible that in the next tower they're going to move the arm up on the tower itself, so they won't have to do this extension anymore. So it'll be a little bit better.
So always things changing on the ground systems. And Trevor, this is not the only launch tower for Starship that is either existing or under construction. So there's kind of an identical one being built right now at Cape Canaveral. In fact, when you're there and you look at pad 39A, if you look to the right, there's the Starship tower going up. So I would imagine that they're probably holding back some of the things that they need to get done at that particular tower until they learn everything they need to learn from this one, right?
Yeah, for sure. We saw SpaceX rapidly assemble that Starship tower at 39A, and then seemed to just halt construction of that pad completely. And in fact, SpaceX has started making a second launch tower at the Cape, and they shipped all of those segments down to Starbase. Oop, there it is, from Space Coast Live. They shipped all of those tower segments down to Starbase, and they're now starting to work on the second orbital launch site at Starbase. So I think there's just like a little bit of reprioritization going on, where SpaceX realizes that shorter term it's probably better to have more launches out of Boca, just because you're not interrupting Falcon program if something goes wrong. But also, it very much is, let's learn all we can from the pad that we built at Starbase, and then apply those lessons to future pads, whether that's at the Cape, at Starbase, or I'm sure eventually they'll have pads, all over the United States.
That's right, and every neighborhood where they want to put one of those things will will complain about the noise, because I would imagine. I mean, I think it'd be kind of cool. Although I think if we saw, we've seen some footage from Boca Chica where every house anywhere near that huge Starship is shaking from the launch there. And related to that question, I just have to find it here. I'll just ask it. I know the person who asked it will get the acknowledgement of the question being asked. But somebody did ask, what tips do they have for going down to see this? Obviously, the rocket's so large that you don't have to be next to it to appreciate the size and scale. Now, neither one of you nor I have been down there, but I don't know if Trevor or Ryan, you have any suggestions if you are traveling down there to where to go, where to watch this from. I would imagine the hotels fill up pretty quick. It wasn't an area that was really equipped for this level of attention, I think, in the past. But any tips that you can provide on something this large based on some of the other things you've witnessed?
I'd say you should ask in our member Discord, or, in some other public location, for people who have been down. I'm sure they'll have better tips than either of us will have. Also, NSF did make a video on it ahead of IFT2.
So there you go. Check out the search on our YouTube channel, and you can get a whole guide for seeing it. And one of the things that you really don't appreciate, because we talked about this, how big this thing must look in person. I went down for the launch of Artemis 1, and at the NASA press site, you're 3 miles away. And even at that distance, because at least in Florida it's pretty flat, and I think in Boca Chica it's pretty similar. Even though you're that far away, it still looks like you're right next to it. It's pretty amazing, just the scale of this thing and what you would be able to see and feel in person. And one of the most amazing things is the fact that you see all of this power unleashed when these rockets lift off, and it takes about 22 to 25 seconds for the sound and the shock waves to actually reach you. It's a really incredible experience. So if you ever get a chance to watch a rocket launch, no matter where you can see it from, I think it's worth looking at. So we are, of course, doing Countdown to Launch, where we're looking at all the things that are going into the third flight test of Starship. And as many of you know who follow us here on the channel, we have been really doing these shows ahead of the launch just to look at all the different factors that go into what SpaceX has to do, what the FAA has to do. And what's been amazing about this flight is that we've had very little beyond some unknowns related to the launch license to see. In fact, a lot of the activity at Starbase has been pretty quiet, at least from our eyes, due to the fact that this rocket is stacked. We think they're pretty much getting ready for a Thursday launch potentially. However, the weather is looking a little iffy, and this was from Falcon's Maze, and this prompted me to check out the National Weather Service website here. And it looks like for Thursday in Boca Chica, it's going to be breezy with a southeast wind 14 to 21 miles an hour with gusts as high as 31. Ryan, this is a big rocket, but I would imagine winds are not good for big or small rockets. What do you think is going to happen with that?
No, well, it depends on, I guess, where it's coming from or how powerful it is, whether or not it's enough wind shear to cause an issue. I don't know what the limits for Starship are in terms of launch. SpaceX knows what their limits are. So and the other part of that is too, if it's too windy, they may not even allow crews up on the ship QD to do final checkouts. So that could definitely slow things down or even delay things a bit there. So, well, we're gonna have to wait and see. The other part of that too is that it could be cloudy out. So hope not. Because right. When this thing's gonna launch, it's gonna be basically nighttime, because I think sunrise is like 7:38 a.m. or something along those lines, and the window opens at like 7. So I want to see a hot stage jellyfish. That'd be really cool to see. There. Yeah. Yep. So let's hope. Fingers crossed. Let's hope. Yeah.
And one of the things I would be very interested in seeing is just how much of the area that rocket will light up, because it is so much more powerful. There's a lot more light coming out off of those rocket engines because of the quantity of them. So I think we'll have maybe a little sun lifting off the pad there, which will be fun to see. I did catch the last 3 space shuttle launches, and 2 of them launched into the clouds. So you saw it very briefly, then it was gone. So hopefully everyone watching gets a good look at it as it heads up, and hopefully one that's not obscured by clouds. And Trevor, when we talk about winds, because when we look at winds here from the National Weather Service, these are winds on the ground, but you also have upper level winds to contend with, which have their own amount of complexities there. So maybe just to inform our audience a little bit here about some of the dangers of upper level winds on a rocket this big.
Yeah, so when it comes to upper level winds, you're not as much concerned about the speed of the wind like you are at ground level. You're more concerned about so-called wind shear. And what that is for reasons that I couldn't explain from a physical perspective, in the atmosphere you get a lot of layers of air that are perhaps moving in different directions at fairly rapid speed. So the problem is, let's say you have one layer of air that's moving 100 miles an hour this direction, and then on top of that you have 100 miles an hour moving the other direction or something like that. Now all of a sudden, as your vehicle flies through that, it has a massive torque applied to it. And you don't really want a massive torque being applied to your vehicle. That could cause, the stages to separate or to go way off course or something that just wouldn't be ideal. So generally, this is something that affects larger rockets slightly more, just because they're so tall, they're so wide, you have so much surface area, and you have a huge lever that to act the torque on. So a smaller amount of torque can cause, more angular acceleration.
So your winds on the ground have to be good, and your winds up there have to be good too, and that's why they launched those balloons to get that reading there.
Yeah.
So Thursday, weather-wise, could be we don't want to, we're speculating again. This is still a couple days out, but right now it looks like it's going to be pretty breezy on the ground. We don't know what the upper level winds will be. I'm sure there will be a more formal weather forecast that will impact the launch one way or the other. Ryan, though, what happens if they can't launch Thursday? Maybe they don't get the license, maybe they can, but the winds aren't good. Do you know of any backup opportunities that our viewers and our NSF crew should be planning for?
Well, they have road closures to try to launch on Friday and on Saturday, and if I remember correctly, all of the alerts, all the like the NOTAMs, NOTMARs, and whatnot, they extend basically the 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th, and the 18th. So they'll have chances to launch over the next couple of days, or the next couple of days after a possible attempt on the 14th. So basically, they have that planned out just in case they can't make it. The windows during the weekend, if I remember correctly, they go down to about an hour or so. And then the windows usually during the weekday can be around 2 hours. So it'd be like 7 a.m. to like 9 a.m. for the windows. So they'll have a lot of opportunities, and they can always fuel and then hold for a little bit. I think it was like 15, 20 minutes they could hold before, and now they probably can hold a little bit longer because they can load prop in what is it? It's like 50 minutes now. So compared to it was like 90, 97 minutes last time. So yeah, they can go a lot faster, which could usually correlate to them being able to hold for a little bit longer, unlike Falcon, where it's an instantaneous window.
Right. So there's some flexibility, and it's amazing to hear how much faster they can get this thing fueled up, given the amount of fuel that it takes. And you know what? If you want to fuel your experience for this launch, whenever it happens, we can help you out with that, because you can go to shop.nasaspaceflight.com, and while we can't sell you rocket fuel just yet, we can sell you this amazing patch. There it is, this way. There you go. It is a high-resolution embroidery here. It looks spectacular, and this patch is going to commemorate the third launch of Starship. We have patches for the other two missions that we offered during the prior run-ups to those, so if you are collecting, here is the third flight test patch that you can add to your collection. And on top of that, we've got all sorts of other great stuff at shop.nasaspaceflight.com. We put that patch on a bunch of stuff, so if you want to get a t-shirt or a hoodie, I got to do some shopping a little bit later to get my wardrobe back on brand here. And you can find all this stuff over at shop.nasaspaceflight.com. Fast shipping, great idea for gifts for the space lovers in your life, because we are very hard to shop for, but not if you go over there to check it out. So all the stuff is very high quality. And we also have some great metal prints that our photographers have taken out in the field, so you can decorate your home or office with those. So all sorts of great stuff over at shop.nasaspaceflight.com. And when you check out, you have the ability to leave a store message. And we've got one right here from Macy J, who picked up something at the store. Let's go to Space Orbit, the Moon and Beyond, thanking us for the great coverage. And we thank you for stopping by shop.nasaspaceflight.com. By the way, all those patches are limited editions, so if you wanted to get your hands on one, don't wait, because they go quick. So there you go. And also, we had an anonymous store purchase here. My control panel's backing up a little bit, but anonymous said, "Good luck, Starship and SpaceX, NSF rocks." I also want to thank a Red Team membership that just disappeared on my control panel there, but I will also thank Adam Sims SpaceX for becoming a PadRat member. Also, William, who left a store message thanking us for the wonderful coverage here. So thank you very much, William, for that. And then RC Horseman gifted 5 Red Team memberships. So thank you for your support of the channel and for helping other members become members. I don't know if we have the graphic ready, but we do have a list of things that membership gets you here on the channel, because there's a lot of extra content that you have available as a member. So let me get RC Horseman's up here as well. And we also see that JS Web Productions upgraded to the Capcom level of membership. And we'll pull up those membership benefits as we get closer to the end of the stream here. So we are rounding the corner here. Let me take a few more questions here from the chat. Ben Glasgow's got a good question here. What do you think would happen if Starship is below a certain altitude as it descends? Would they be less likely to activate the flight termination system for a more centralized debris field? Because that is a consideration, right? I mean, if your rocket's coming back down, depending on where you explode it, your debris will fall because the whole thing doesn't disintegrate. Even though it looks like it did from the last flight, there is a lot left over that has to come back down. Trevor, there's certainly some guidelines about mariners not going into the zone in which this debris might fall, but is there any consideration to whether or not to use the flight termination system, especially on the way back down?
Yeah, so this is actually a really good question. Once they are in the descent corridor, which, right, the FAA very clearly outlines exactly where the ship is allowed to be. Once it's within that, they'll almost certainly deactivate that flight termination system. That's what's called safing it. And then once it's safed, the FTS cannot go off. So for example, they also do this on Falcon 9, where you'll hear during landing, they'll say, Falcon 9 FTS has safed on the boosters. And what that means is that once they're in the good corridor, they would rather, if the vehicle experiences an anomaly, it's not going to be able to exit that corridor. So they don't want to generate a big debris field with FTS. So the same thing will be done with Starship.
And Ryan, when I was watching Flight Test 2, I think we had probably some of the best imagery of a flight termination system engaging. And what was striking to me was the fact that it looks like it's a combination of things here, right? The explosive kind of kicks things off, but there's more to the destruction, right? It's also all the atmospheric pressure that is being experienced and the aerodynamic forces. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so like in Flight 2, Ship 25's FTS was activated. I mean, SpaceX confirmed that one. When they activated that FTS, it basically blows a hole near where the common dome is. And when that happens, you basically, whatever's left of any liquid oxygen or liquid methane, the point is to mix the oxidizer and the fuel together, and then the fire from the explosion is your ignition source, and it's supposed to ignite it and propagate and destroy the whole vehicle. SpaceX did not confirm that it went off on booster 9, although when you look at the slow-mo footage, it looks like it did. Personally, this is just me. Personally, I think when the engines were having issues and one of those engines exploded, as they explained in their update, that the flight computer then realized it had no more control of the vehicle, and it went to go activate the FTS, but the vehicle was already in a state of blowing up because of the engines going. So it kind of just helped it along, is my guess, is what happened. But it looked like the FTS went on that as well. So
when we think about, because as I was watching them load the flight terminations system onto Starship, the team usually comes out with the explosives on backpacks. And certainly you can have a small explosive that can make a very large explosion, but clearly there's more to the story of blowing up a rocket than just having the explosives themselves. It actually triggers a larger explosion from the onboard fuel. So that was really an interesting point there. I did want to get Pukerlee's question up here because we talked about the launch window for Thursday, if Thursday does work out, but we didn't actually talk about the exact time. We said the morning before sunrise over in Texas. Trevor, do we have the times in Central or Eastern or whatever time zone you wish to share that people should be marking their calendars for?
Yeah, so the window opens at 7 a.m. Central Time. And I believe it's about a 2-hour window, and it's the same on Friday. And then if it goes over the weekend, as Ryan was saying, it's a shorter window, closer to an hour. So mark your calendars for, we don't have the clock up right now, but 7 a.m. Central on March 14th.
So 7 a.m. Central U.S. time on Thursday. And one of the best things about clicking the bell on our YouTube channel is that you will get notified when we go live. And of course, we do that well ahead of the actual launch because there's always some interesting stuff that happens ahead of it. One of the things that I love to see when they've got that rocket fully fueled up, and I remember this from the second flight test, Ryan, is just that cloud of condensation that forms around the rocket. It's like a little cloud that sits on the ground. It's pretty neat, isn't it?
Oh yeah, it's really cool. We saw that during the wet dress. It looked really, really cool at night, so I can't wait to see that. Yeah.
It's pretty neat. So we will be keeping an eye on that as things develop here. We have some more questions here. Here's a good one from JS Webb. about what we're most excited about seeing, because there might be a lot of things to see on this flight. So, Trevor, what are you looking forward to most, having now observed, as we all have remotely, the last two launches?
Yeah, I think for me, the really exciting thing has been just this smoother flow that we've seen ahead of this flight, with just less testing required. Oh, I don't want to jinx it by saying fewer D-stacks, but so
Right.
far, fewer D-stacks, and I'm sure now in 5 minutes they'll start a D-stacking operation since I said that.
Right, of course.
And yeah, I just really hope that the same thing happens in flight, where they easily reach the suborbital, not in orbit, that they're targeting, and then go through all of the demos that they want to do. Whether those are successful or not, I don't think at the end of the day that will preclude them from re-entering. But I really, really hope and am excited for SpaceX to get some heat shield data, because I think so far, right, all of us have been asking the question, well, how is this thing going to hold up? How many tiles can they lose and still be able to successfully re-enter? And I hope after this flight we'll have a better answer to that question.
Yeah, right, because we saw some of the tiles fall off. We did not ever see the system actually work because they had to destroy both Flight 1 and 2's Starships before they got there. Ryan, what are you looking forward to most on this flight?
I'm looking forward to see if Booster does its boost back burn and comes back down for a landing. I really want to see ship re-enter. Whether it survives re-entry or not, seeing a vehicle that size re-enter is going to be really, really cool, one way or the other. So that's what I'm really excited for.
Me too,
Hopefully
and
it
I
gets
hope
there.
we get some. I hope we get some views from the ocean. Seeing this, I would imagine it's going to look amazing. We've seen, obviously, I've actually seen it in person with a Dragon capsule flying over where I was staying, or re-entering over where I was staying in Florida, and it looks pretty cool. I think seeing something as large as Starship re-entering would be amazing, and hopefully a controlled flight down to the ocean to some degree or another. So I will say, what got me most excited about the second flight test was seeing all of those engines light up and stay lit, because I think a lot of the work that SpaceX did on the ground systems led to that moment. And seeing those mock diamonds was amazing. The hot staging was amazing. There were so many exciting things about that second flight test. And I was hosting the stream at the time, so I was obviously watching it, but certainly went back and watched it a few more times after that. And for me, I'm kind of with Trevor. I'm looking forward to seeing that re-entry, especially if there's any cameras on board. Typically, SpaceX does give us some treats after one of their missions with some of the footage that they couldn't get sent down from the rocket in real time. So hopefully we'll see some of that as well. So great stuff there. We've got about 4 or 5 minutes left here. Trevor, I'm just looking at my list of questions here that we have from viewers. Here's a good question. When they're using the liquid oxygen and methane for a wet dress rehearsal, and this question is going to appear briefly or soon from Rob, how much fuel do they lose when they go through one of these rehearsals? Because obviously a lot of the fuel can evaporate, especially the liquid oxygen, and there's a time that it takes to get those tanks reloaded. I know SpaceX is bringing more and more tanks down to the tank farm there to accommodate everything, but fueling this rocket is not something you can do every day, right?
Yeah, at least as of right now, they can't do that every day. So we don't have, we unfortunately don't have exact numbers on this, but it's not that much. It's only on the order of a few percent of propellant that they lose. But a few percent of a buttload of propellant is a lot of propellant. So they end up losing a decent bit, and the tank farm that they have right now is like just barely big enough for them to successfully fuel or fully fill all of Starship. So if they lose any, they basically have to get some additional truckers in to fill up the tank farm again. But it's not a significant amount, but it's enough that they need to do a little bit of extra work.
And Ryan, it's been interesting following this particular mission, but also what we're seeing now with ULA and some of the others out there, is that it seems like the entire industry is shifting over to methane as a fuel. Is it just because it's easier to get your hands on methane? What do you think the drive is for methane versus kerosene like they're using on Falcon?
Well, I'll use hydrogen in this example as well. So, like when you have kerosene and liquid oxygen, you can get a decent amount of thrust out of it, but your ISP isn't as good as, say, hydrogen or even methane. Then hydrogen, sometimes you don't really get a ton of thrust out of those engines, but you can get a lot of efficiency. So they're really good for, interplanetary missions and stuff like that. And methane is kind of in the middle. Methane, you can get a decent thrust out of, and you can get a decent ISP out of. And not only that, you can make methane on Mars. So there's that plus for Starship as well. But it's kind of like that middle fuel. It's cryogenic like hydrogen is, but it's got much better properties to use on engines than, I wouldn't say much better, but it's got different properties to use on engines than whether it be hydrogen or kerosene.
And that is where the industry is going here. So we'll keep an eye on it. It looks like it's like kind of the Goldilocks fuel. And of course, if we do get to Mars, being able to leave Mars, I think would probably be desirable. And Trevor, you can't just take fuel to Mars, right? You have to make it there.
Yeah, or at least if you try to take all of your fuel to Mars, that'll be an incredibly inefficient infrastructure. So yeah, I think the one other key thing that methane has over hydrogen and especially RP1 is since it's fairly close to being the same temperature as the liquid oxygen. So it's within on the order of 20 degrees, if I remember correctly, for its 20 degrees centigrade for its liquid state. So that just means you need a lot less insulating on the common dome between them, which is another advantage. And then, of course, as Ryan was saying, your increase in exhaust velocity means higher ISP, which is very nice to have while still producing a lot of thrust.
So there you go. That is why methane is the fuel of choice here. So we're pretty much at the hour here. So let me, before we close out, why don't we take some predictions here, because we'll probably be coming back in the next day or two to continue covering all the lead up to this exciting launch of the Starship for the third time as a full stack. Ryan, what's your prediction? Are we going to get that FAA license tomorrow, or maybe right after we end the stream, as it always happens? What do you think?
We could get it today. I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility. We'll see. Maybe it could just arrive on Wednesday. I actually don't know when it's going to arrive. For the FAA, it'll get here when it gets here. They're just doing their job, and they got to do it right. So, you get it right. That's what I say. However long it takes you to do it, get it right. Make sure it's done right. So.
Exactly. Safety first, because you don't want Starship landing on your house or your boat. And I don't think there's adequate insurance for any of that happening. So, Trevor, what are your predictions here? Are we going to have this thing off the ground Thursday or maybe not? What do you think?
Ooh, that's hard. I'm thinking more like Friday. That I don't know what the reason for the delay will be, but based on how the previous two flights have gone, I would think that there'll probably be a really small delay. But the good news is that all of the delays that we're talking about are going to be on the order of days. It's not going to be on the order of weeks or months.
Right.
So hopefully by this time next week, the pad will be empty and the pad will be in good condition for Flight 4.
And I think we're seeing just how SpaceX does its thing, where you have some pretty spectacular runs of their hardware as it's being developed and tested in these flight tests, and then suddenly things just start working. And I think we're getting to that point now where at least the hard part, getting this thing off the ground and into some kind of orbit, may soon be not necessarily routine, but certainly something that they can predict will happen on each launch, and then all of the more complex in-orbit operations will happen there. And for me, I think the weather might be an issue if the launch license isn't, but we will be ready. We are ready, and if you want, and you head over to our YouTube channel, we do have, I believe, they're telling me in the back channel here, the live coverage stream is like locked and ready to go. So you can hit the reminder, and so you'll get that notification when our coverage goes live. So there it is, Flight Test 3. You can hit the button, and you'll get one of those notifications on your phone when it happens. Just be prepared. We start early because we don't like to miss anything. So be ready for that, but it'll be an exciting morning, just like the other ones were, and we will keep covering this and the lead up as time goes on here. So I want to thank my co-hosts here, Ryan Weber and Trevor Sesnick, for providing such great information. I always learn something from my co-hosts, so I really appreciate all of the knowledge that you can share with me and our viewers. I want to thank our viewers for watching. We have two more supporters to thank here. Anonymous, who's thanking us for all the great coverage of space-related stuff. And Ed just picked up all 3 patches. So you are ready to go, and we'll probably have a 4th one by the time the 4th flight comes around. So thank you very much for your support. I want to thank everyone who tunes into these shows. They're a lot of fun to make, and we all are just passionate enthusiasts of spaceflight and all the exciting things that are happening, and we really enjoy bringing this to all of you. So thank you all very much for your support. I want to thank also the folks behind the scene today, Jay Keegan and Carson Phillips, who are our producers. A lot goes into this, so thank you everyone for tuning in, and we will be back again with more. And also, if you were curious about what membership gets you, you can see up on the screen over here, my screen's to the left, all the benefits that becoming a member will provide. So that is going to do it for this edition of Countdown to Launch. We are going to continue watching everything down at Starbase with our 24/7 cameras. You can watch them too over on our YouTube channels. Hit the subscribe button. Don't forget to follow us on all of the other social platforms that we are on. And until next time, this is Lon Seidman. Thanks everybody for watching.
And here we go.
We have liftoff. Propulsion continues to be nominal.
R68 chamber pressure looks good.
Doubling up. Roger, Atlantic.
Water towers fly! Yes! Tango down to nominal.
Flight downside FD off. Bring in FD off. Off. It's orange! 145! Oh my god! Oh my god! Decollage. Put that in the big bag, you know.
343 unfolds to go.
Indeed.
We rise together back to the moon and beyond.
The methane would be igniting in the flare, correct?
Yikes. You dead? Sure. We don't need any more of these.